there are no objections, I'll just start. Welcome everybody to the Society for UAP Studies annual Distinguished Lecture Series in honor of the pioneering scientist and consummate scholar J. Allen Hynek, who we can now say devoted himself to laying the foundations for the very thing that we together are attempting to give birth to today. An independent academic discipline devoted to the many interrelated aspects of UAP. It is a subject about which we still know very little, but for which we are gathered in devotion to a common cause, discipline building. A few years ago, when I founded the Society in our journal Limina, now going strong in its second volume of essays and scientific research articles, I established a number of distinguished lecture series to honor key figures in our field, both enthusiastic and agnostic or skeptic. The idea I had was that we ought to have a lecture series of distinguished scholars and scientists in our nation field, not unlike the infamous Gifford lectures. Indeed, this lecture series from long ago was my direct inspiration. To be a place where we can exercise radical intellectual freedom and free, open exploration of human knowledge, both inside and outside accepted territorial zones of understanding. Thus, the intention was to cover the physical and experiential aspects of UAP, as well as a decided agnosticism or even skepticism about the intention was to cover the physical, all of which contributes to the growth of human knowledge. The idea Lord Gifford, who died in 1887, had was for the lecture to be devoted to natural theology, but in the widest possible sense, to cover the divine, the infinite, and the ultimate questions concerning human existence. My own work recently is inspired by Spinoza, the 17th century radical Enlightenment philosopher, whose concept of the divine expanded to include nature, the natural, but as an aspect of the infinite whole. And that is indeed what we are studying as we study UAP, some as yet indeterminate aspect of this greater whole, as natural as it may be divine. The Gifford lectures range, therefore, over a radically interdisciplinary lot. Famously, William James delivered his varieties of religious experience lectures in 1901 and 02. Niels Bohr, his causality and complementarity lectures in 1949 and 50. Hannah Arendt, her Life of the Mind lectures in 1973, and Carl Sagan's The Varieties of Scientific Experience, delivered in 1985. Early in his own seminal text on our subject, the UFO experience, Hynek quotes philosopher William James, in fact, whose own Gifford lectures were a landmark in the study of precisely those phenomena, religious experiences, that continue even today to challenge a science committed for centuries now to a strictly materialist reductionist framework of explanation and understanding for all the phenomena of nature. The point for Hynek was not to argue that UFOs, today UAP, are not physical, but rather to embrace James's wider point made at the threshold of discovery of the key elements of science today. Sciences like relativity and quantum theory, genetics, and the sciences of the mind, which today have not entirely been worked out in all of their profound implications. Hynek quoted James at length in his prologue, concluding with, "Whatever else be certain, this at least is certain," James wrote, "that the world of our present natural knowledge is enveloped in a larger world of some sort, of whose residual properties we at present can frame no positive idea." And that is the fundamental question to which Hynek and his seminal texts were devoted, a very basic but foundational one that he often stressed in his writings and lectures. Do UAP constitute truly new empirical observations? The conclusion of the infamous Condon study of 1968, published 4 years before Hynek's book, was no, but only because that analysis, as we now come to understand, was aimed at studying UFO reports rather than the phenomena themselves. And this is, it seems, what is decisively changing today. Dr. Knuth, our distinguished speaker for this year's Hynek Lecture, is exactly part of this change. From the analysis and reliance on mere UAP reports to the establishment of a science of the phenomena that first approaches the question of what physical data can in fact be obtained if the proper research system informed by those reports is conceptualized properly and finally deployed. No trivial task, either conceptually or practically, as Dr. Knuth's lecture today will likely demonstrate. Dr. Knuth is a true pioneer here and works directly in the enduring spirit of Hynek and all that Hynek represented. And with this, I hand you over to my distinguished colleague, our host and chair for today's lecture, Dr. Christian Peters, who will introduce our speaker, Dr. Kevin Knuth. Dr. Peters is one of the Society's newly appointed advisory council members, a body which is charged with steering our organization into this new future of UAP studies. Christian, please.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, Kevin. First of all, quickly, I wanted to say something on the organizational level, because after you finish, Kevin, there will hopefully be a Q&A round. And I think, Mike, given the high number of people, I think it would be good if we swap to a mode where people start writing their questions, and they could do so during the lecture and put that in the chat. And we're going to review the chat and go up in that order. If you would both agree, I would propose that. Perfect. So, okay, tonight we're going to hear from Dr. Kevin Knuth. Knuth. I'm reading it. Knuth. It's okay. You say that later. A physicist who has done something almost unheard of in academia. He's taken one of the most taboo subjects around and applied the same scientific rigor he uses for everything else. No eye rolling, no apologetic disclaimers, just solid methods, real data, and careful reasoning. I guess in this room here, Kevin barely needs an introduction, honestly. If you've spent some time on the UAP topic and you've been looking into the serious research on that, you already know his name. He's all over the place, and in his real life, embodying the full scientific personality of that, he is a professor of physics at the University of Albany, SUNY, where his work spans an impressive range. And now I'm speaking in a foreign language to me, saying what that science is. It's on maximum entropy methods for astronomical imaging. I've heard about entropy. I every once in a while use that as a political scientist, talking about order and disorder, and I think it has nothing to do with the way that you use it. I'm very sure about that. You're working on Bayesian inference and deep questions about space-time and relativity. That's things I can relate to. Your work, your numerous articles have appeared in very renowned journals of your discipline, in Physical Review, in the Astrophysical Journal. I think you're also the Herausgeber, I'm lacking the English word for that, editor, maybe, for a journal. Yeah, Entropy. And in other words, you're a thoroughly mainstream physicist, you could say, which makes your decision to dive into UAP research all the more noteworthy. I confess that there is some irony of me standing here because I'm a political scientist. I'm talking about institutions, narratives on incentives, and the occasional data table, and nothing like particular accelerators on entropy discovering instruments, if those do exist. But I'm genuinely honored and excited to introduce you, Kevin, for two reasons. First, I really think that your work is a godsend for us in on the social science side. It's important because we wrestle with rumors, with stigma, with analyzing public discourse, and you do deliver what really is desperately needed. It's hard numbers and physics-based reality checks. you do show us that UAP aren't just, reports of mysterious lights or mistaken planes. And because as long as they stay in that category, the denial and the ridicule is something that is easily instrumentalized. I mean, take the famous 2004 Nimitz encounter. Everybody knows here that, this is one of the main witnesses when it comes to, publicly talk about the UAP discourse. And there an object reportedly dropped from 28,000 feet to sea level in just under a second. We know that. It's been data has been taken, even though I don't know if it's recorded, but it's been reported by the people that are looking at the radar instruments. And, and if I tell that my colleagues in the social sciences, they would go, all right, that sounds impressive. I'm sure, we're sure we can do that. There is, black budget problems, projects that are capable of doing that. So here comes Kevin, who light-handedly showed that even if there are conservative assumptions on what actually happened, that maneuver would have demanded power in the terawatt range. So briefly matching the entire US nuclear grid. So when I mentioned that paper, Kevin, which I very often do also in my own work, talking to particularly stubborn colleagues, they don't have to believe every detail to grasp the implications. And the implications are, and they get that, it's kind of like a nudging tool for me, that if the data are roughly accurate, we are looking at the performance that makes our best aerospace tech look quaint. That's it. And nothing quite kills a cocktail party chatter, like casually mentioning a 1.1 terawatt of instantaneous power, which kind of sounds very Star Trekky, and people they get that idea. And second, Kevin, I admire you, and I think we all in this room do, because you take UAP seriously. You've said several times publicly that you've come off the fence, in a sense that we're happy to live in a time when we can start doing the science and have not to rest in a very energy consuming discussion about what is possible and not. It's not about forever hedging with endless qualifications. You do what good scientists do. You let the evidence drive the conversation. So you can see in this approach a mind that is shaped by both rigorous science and imaginative science fiction. And Kevin combines that in the best possible way. You treat UAPs as what they might very well be, one of the most intriguing puzzles in human cultural and natural history, deserving our full attention. So that blend of intellectual courage and methodological precision is generally rare. For decades, UAP research was considered, and we still know that in Germany, where I'm hailing from, that still might be the case. It was considered academic suicide. And Kevin has helped to change that equation, to change the conservation. He's been instrumental in creating the University of Albany UAPX collaboration, that as a role model is bringing calibrated instruments and university level standards to the field. You co-authored and headed what's probably one of the most thorough reviews of UAP science that has been produced so far. It's nearly 200 pages. I mean, it's an opus magnum, and many in this room have been involved, from my knowledge, covering government programs, physical evidence, sensor data spanning decades in multiple countries. So whether you buy every conclusion or not, these works, they set the new standards of how the topic should be studied. And again, in closing, let me look beyond the pure physics in here, because I think that UAP research is a perfect test case for how societies handle deep insecurity and uncertainty. In political science, we study how institutions build trust and make decisions, and based on incomplete information, you call that politics. And the UAP, they sit right at this crossroad of national security, scientific inquiry, and public credibility. The incentives to look away, they are powerful, and people have over many decades. But so are the potential costs powerful of ignoring important data. And with your work, rigorous, transparent analysis seems to be the only way forward to counter an epistemic environment where alternative facts have become some sort of a currency to deal with uncertainty. And Kevin's emphasis on verified census, quantified uncertainty, and statistical rigor, they give us a framework for a productive debate. So a last final note on the Nimitz-Drop example. The point, I think, isn't that every radar reading is perfect and can be taken as a proof. The point is this: if you take one representative case and model it conservatively, the implied physics are extraordinary enough to justify better data collection, not dismissal, better instruments, not shoulder shrugs. And Kevin reframes the whole question, not should we believe, but what do we need to learn from that? And I think that's a practical step-by-step approach that should appeal across the disciplines and also into the humanities and into the social sciences. And everybody in this room, having followed this field, how desperately we need better infrastructure, standardized data, shared repositories, a culture of criticism that doesn't default to ridicule. Kevin has consistently pushed for exactly that: science without stigma. Bring your skepticism, absolutely, but make it productive. Challenge the data, not the researchers. Replace whispered speculation with actual instrumentation. And I really think at this point, this connects to J. Allen Hynek's legacy. As we all know, Hynek began as a skeptic and evolved into someone who modeled disciplined curiosity. And I really like that expression, disciplined curiosity, because I exactly see that in your work. Follow the evidence and let it reshape your thinking when warranted. Kevin follows directly in that tradition. He's not preaching about alien visitors, well, maybe not in his peer-reviewed papers. In side discussions, maybe. But you're certainly translating observations into testable questions. And tonight you're going to map the contours of this emergent scientific approach, what history teaches us, what evidence we have, which senses matter, and how to build research programs that, as a matter of fact, can survive the sheer battle of peer review. So Kevin, thank you for the clarity, for your backbone, and for your craftsmanship. You've helped many of us to shift from thinking this is embarrassing to this is actually doable. It's feasible. And so please join me all in welcoming Dr. Kevin H. Knuth, and stick around for the questions and answers afterward. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for that generous and kind introduction. I really, it's wonderful to be here. I'm very honored to be here, being able to speak at a distinguished lecture, commemorating J. Allen Hynek. What a great honor. And regarding questions, I should say that if someone has a clarification question, and as I understand, they're going to be put in the chat. So Christian, if you see a question that's a clarification question, feel free to interrupt and let me clarify something. I want to make sure that everything's clear and people are following. That's important.
Yes. So may I quickly ask people to put "for clarification" in front of your question, so we know when to potentially interrupt you, Kevin. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. Let me see if I can get this screen working, which I've practiced, so this should not be a problem. And I will go to infinity for a moment, but that should not last. So how does that look? Is everything settled down and working, I hope?
It's working, yes. Perfect.
All right, brilliant. Right, so again, I'm honored to be here, honored to speak on this topic. I'll talk about the new scientific study of UAP, and I'll explain the acronym that I chose here. This is actually an acronym that came out from one of the U.S. congressional reports, and I thought that this was probably the best description of these things that I had seen. So look at that. That picture is generated by OpenArt AI, because this is not what it really looks like when you're studying UAP in the field. Although this would be really amazing and really cool. This is what it really looks like. A lonely hill in the middle of the dark, sometimes by yourself, and a little scary. So this is what, and often raining, and you're trying to cover up your computer and make sure everything's working all right. So these are great first slides. What I really should have as a first slide for a talk like this is this one. Should welcome all of you to here. Thank you all for coming. Welcome UFO people. So J. Allen Hynek was a complicated individual, as both Christian and Michael had noted. He was a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at Ohio State University from the 1930s to the 1956. He worked on a satellite tracking project in the late 50s at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, and then he was professor and chair of astronomy at Northwestern University from 1960 to 1978 when he retired. He started out as a debunker. He was a skeptic and worked as a debunker for Project Sign and Grudge. And on UFOs, at that time, he said the whole subject seems utterly ridiculous, which is something that a lot of us have thought at some point on hearing about these things. And as many of you know, and I'll mention, he instigated the whole swamp gas debacle in Michigan. So real people are complicated, and J. Allen Hynek was not an exception. I'm going to be talking about the paper that that we recently got published in Progress in Aerospace Sciences on the science of UAP studies. And here are pictures of J. Allen Hynek with Dick Haynes, Richard Haynes, who is also a co-author of our paper. And the picture on the right shows J. Allen Hynek with Jacques Vallée, who is also a co-author on our paper. So J. Allen Hynek enjoyed his role as a debunker, and he wrote, "My own investigations for Project Sign added to that negative attitude surrounding UFOs too, I think, because I was quite negative in most of my evaluations. I stretched far to give something a natural explanation, sometimes when it may not have really had it. I remember one case from Snake River Canyon, I think it was, where a man and his two sons saw a metallic object come swirling down the canyon, which caused the top of the trees to sway. In my attempt to find a natural explanation for it, I said it was some sort of atmospheric eddy. Of course, I had never seen an eddy like that, and I had no real reason to believe that one even existed. But I was so anxious to find a natural explanation because I was convinced that it had to have one, that naturally I did, in fact. It wasn't until quite some time had passed that it began to change my mind." And of course, later he strongly supported the study of UFOs. Now this is a really important quote because it makes it clear that some of the scientists, the respectable people who were working on these US projects, who basically debunked a lot of these sightings, they were just making stuff up. And in some ways, I'm grateful that J. Allen Hynek started out as a debunker working on these projects, because we now have a record that this is what was actually going on. That they're making up excuses. They didn't actually believe the excuses they were saying. There are many cases, and we talk about some in the paper, where the Project Blue Book labeled it an airplane, where you read what happened and you realize it can't possibly be an airplane, but that's what they labeled it as. And of course, skeptics, what I will call non-believers, because that's what it really comes down to, will grab onto any explanation they can have so they don't have to believe that something interesting is happening here. So of course I have to ask this question: what are UAP? And the acronym I chose in the title for my talk was the one that came from one of the recent congressional documents, where it stood for Unidentified Aerospace-Undersea Phenomena Sometimes it's meant to stand for unidentified aerial phenomena, unidentified anomalous phenomena. But I like this explanation for a couple reasons. One is it includes undersea, which is the most unappreciated and ignored facet of UAP. And this we'll come back to at some point. This is the one aspect that we don't pay attention to, the one we know least about. We live on a water planet, but we are not water creatures, and we do not have access to our oceans. And so this is part of the mystery that we're having to deal with. Now, the other problem with this, and the similar problem with UFOs, I mean, UFOs was unidentified flying objects, certainly seems to rule out undersea. But the whole term unidentified is fraught with all sorts of misconceptions because it's ambiguous. And the word phenomena is also ambiguous. So this acronym is just ambiguous to begin with. And that ambiguity is horribly misused to suggest that we don't at all know what these things are, which is not quite true. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit because it's important. And I think that especially scientists need to be aware of this and realize this is something they should know. But it seems to be something they forget when they talk about this topic. So it comes down to unidentified. Well, what does it mean for something to be unidentified? What does it mean for it to be identified? So let's look at this a little more closely. Identification is an observer-dependent characteristic. It's observer-dependent. So what it means to be identified depends on who's doing the identification. And identification isn't binary. There are degrees of identification. So it's not just identified or not identified. There's a range here. And so let's look at an example of this, a simple example that we can easily get our heads around. So here's an unidentified flying object. As a photograph that I took. Can you identify it? Now, many of you are going to right away say, well, this is what we often hear when we talk about UFOs or UAP. Can you identify it? Your least favorite science popularizer will say, glibly say, it could be anything. And we've heard this a million times. Well, that's not true. It can't be anything. This is not the Empire State Building. This is not a car. This is not Elon Musk's convertible coming back in through the atmosphere. It can't be anything. We can rule some things out, and that's important to keep in mind. So statements like this are just silly at best. But can we identify it? What can we do with it? Well, some people, here's a zoomed in picture. Some people say it's a bird. So is that identified? Well, to some people that would be identified. They would think that fine, it's a bird. Some people who might know a little bit more about the topic might be able to identify this as an eagle, right? So other people might notice the white head and say, oh, it's a bald eagle. It's actually not a bald eagle. And so there we have our first misidentification, but it is an eagle. You could say it's an eagle of the genus Haliaeetus. Haliaeetus. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. That's the correct genus, actually. And what is it? You might be able to identify this as an African fishing eagle. And in fact, here, the next slide has a close-up picture of it after it landed. So that is a picture of an African fishing eagle. Now, the misidentification of this as a bald eagle is actually an important point that's going to come up a bit later. And I actually caused somebody some displeasure when I worked at NASA. There was a secretary in one of the departments at NASA Ames, and she had a lovely poster of an eagle with the American flag flying behind it. And the eagle was an African fishing eagle. It was this thing. It was not a bald eagle. And I'm a lifelong bird watcher. My father was a wildlife artist and taught me bird watching when I was 4, and we bird watched together for forever. So when I walked into her office and I saw the poster in her office at NASA of the eagle or the American flag, and I saw it was an African fishing eagle, and really typically just said, "Oh, that's funny. That's an African fishing eagle." She goes, no, that's a bald eagle. I said, no, it's an African fishing eagle. Notice the white goes further down the back and on the chest, and it has these chestnut shoulder patches. That's an African fishing eagle. It's not a bald eagle. And she did not like me after that because I ruined her poster. There we go. Scientists ruining things. We've been ruining things forever. So now let's jump to UFOs. The 2004 Nimitz case has already been mentioned. Here's an image from the FLIR video. It's an infrared image. Of course, it's going to be blurry. Infrared images are almost always blurry. And similarly, one cannot say that this could be anything. It can't be anything. It's certainly not a seagull. So what happens if the pilot identifies it as an object or a craft or a tic-tac? These are levels of refinement. And so in what sense is it unidentified? We can now just give it the label of a tic-tac and could consider that to be identified. And in some cases we do. We've heard cases where pilots have since seen these objects at sea, off the West Coast especially, and they'll say, wow, I saw a tic-tac, and they've identified it perhaps. We don't know the make and model. We don't know what company produced it or individuals produced it or where it's from, but we can call it a tic-tac. And so it's important to remember, though, that UAP are a class of phenomena, not a single thing. These are all pictures of UAPs. They're all quite different from each other. And to identify them is going to take some work. We don't yet know what the taxonomy is of these things. That takes care and study. So the taxa are unknown. Multiple hypotheses are likely to be found to be correct. And one thing we really need to expect is some confusion resulting from similar but different phenomena. There should be a conflation of hypotheses, and this is bound to happen at some point. Is this object that was seen in the Costa Rica Geographical Survey in 1971 the same type of object as was seen in Weyauwega, Wisconsin in 2003? We don't know. And this happens in nature all the time. Imagine that we've just discovered flying animals. We should expect confusion resulting from similar but different phenomena. Is this a bird? No, it's a mammal. It's a bat, right? This is a bird, which is more closely related to reptiles. And this is a dragonfly, which is an insect, and this is a bee, which is also an insect. So how are these similar? How are these related? These two are more similar to each other than these are, and so on. This situation is not simple, and we shouldn't expect it to be so. So when I get a question like, how do UFOs fly? Well, I can't answer that question. It's potentially unanswerable because what kind of UFO? What type? We expect they'll fly in different ways. We know the insects fly differently than birds do, and they fly differently than bats do. And we should expect conflation among similar but different phenomena. Here are some cases where things get conflated. Bat versus a flying squirrel. Yeah, they're both mammals, but they're very different. A bald eagle versus an African fishing eagle. Or you could consider a hawk moth versus a rufous hummingbird. And so they're similar, rufous-tailed hummingbird. And it's important to remember that not all UFOs or UAP are structured craft. In fact, here's a picture of an unidentified object. The person was photographing the boats in the shipyard in Vancouver and happened to see this on one of their images. Oh, let's look at this more closely. This is an interesting thing. And in fact, at one point I was quite excited because I found 3 other pictures, which I couldn't find on my hard drive the other day, that were similar to this, of unidentified objects. And I thought maybe they could be the same craft. I thought this was some time ago, until I started really studying this and then realized, wait a minute, I know what that is. It is a gull. It's a seagull. This is not an alien spacecraft. Sorry. This is not what we're studying. The other 2 objects I saw that were similar were There was a picture in New Jersey of a barn swallow, I think it is, and another one of a lapwing, which is a type of plover, taken in Dorchester, England. So when we don't know what we're studying exactly, we can't classify them yet. It's important for us to focus instead on their characteristics. And this is what the Defense Intelligence Agency's program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, which many of you have heard about, focused on when they were studying UAP. They focused on what they called the 5 observables: positive lift without lifting surfaces like wings, sudden, they use the term instantaneous acceleration. I cringe as a physicist when I hear that. You can't measure anything that's instantaneous, so you would never know that something's instantaneous. But sudden acceleration, very high acceleration. Number 3, hypersonic velocity without signatures. That means without sonic booms, without fireballs, without blasting of wind or anything horrible happening as you race through the air at crazy speeds. Transmedium travel, which is our first mention of undersea again, going from air to water. That also includes space to air, air to water, and vice versa. And the last one, number 5, is low observability or cloaking. And then we have the 6th observable, which people don't like to talk about so much, which are the biological effects. So the paper that we've written, it is focused on the fact that UAP, formerly known as UFOs, are a longstanding global phenomenon. They have been studied by engineers, scientists, and astronomers, have attempted to study them. There exist several serious academic and private efforts to scientifically study UAP now. And these scientific studies of UAP rely on a diverse array of scientific instrumentation. So several of the goals of this paper were to, number 1, dispel misconceptions about UAP and UFOs. And I'll talk a lot about those misconceptions today. Another goal is to inform about previous efforts to study UAP and UFOs and identify how they were not sufficient and could be done better. And then the final goal was to talk about current efforts to scientifically study UAP and UFOs, which I will mention later at the end of the talk, but I will not spend a lot of time on, because these involve multiple groups who are really better suited to talking about their own work than me summarizing their work. And in fact, those sections of the paper were actually written by the people doing the work. And this is one way in which the authorship of the paper began to grow dramatically. So some of the myths we're going to dispel, this is a list of them. We'll go through these. One myth is there is no UAP or UFO literature to study. There's nothing to study. I haven't read any papers on UFOs. There's nothing out there. We're studying. That's a myth. UFOs are an American problem starting in the 1947. Also a myth. Serious scientists do not see and certainly don't study UFOs. Another myth. Our governments have looked into UFOs and found nothing. That is completely false. There's no evidence that UAP and UFOs are a concern for national defense. That's also false. Although I'm not going to focus on that because I think that's the wrong focus. UFOs are not really anomalous. It's another myth that we'll dispel. That they're just flying objects, as I've mentioned already. They do have something to do with water sometime. And there is never any physical evidence of UAPs or UFOs. Also false. Why is there never any physical evidence? I don't know how many times I've heard this question. There is physical evidence. There's lots of it that's been studied by scientists, but those individuals don't know about it because they haven't done their homework, and that's a problem. So we're going to look at the scientific study of UFOs. This is the theme. And I will issue a warning. Be careful what you wish for, because science has been ruining everything since 1943. I'm taking this as a joke from this comic book series, although this is a fact. 1543. That's when Copernicus did his work on the heliocentric model for the solar system. And yes, science has been ruining all the fun since 1543. I ruined some fun back here with this slide. That's not an alien spacecraft. I'm sorry, but it's not. And I'm sorry that this nice secretary's poster actually had an African fishing eagle with an American flag. But we ruin things. So be careful what you wish for. It won't be all fun and games. There will be fun and games, but it'll be different. So we're going to look to get Skinner for guidance. Wait a minute. Not this guy. This is fiction. Science isn't a TV show. And I'm going to repeat that very clearly. Science is not a TV show. You can take all the implications you can get from that. But we're not going to look to the Skinner for guidance. We're going to look to Principal Skinner for guidance. And here's a quote from Principal Skinner: "There's nothing more exciting than science. You get all the fun of sitting still, being quiet, writing down numbers, paying attention. Science has it all." This is what we're in for. It does not make for a good TV show. People doing real science is not, it's not always interesting to do, and it's certainly not interesting to watch. Now, the scientific study of UAP, we have some special characteristics here, some things that we hold to be important. First, there's a dedication to truth and honesty. Knowing is stronger than believing. I don't want to believe that these things are real or whatever. I want to know that they're real. I don't want to believe that they're whatever. I want to know what they are. That's more important. We rely on repeatability and predictive power to test our ideas. So our theories get tested, our hypotheses have to be tested. And this testing of hypotheses is based on data. We have to collect data, we have to collect information. What kinds of data, how do we handle this? How do we handle observer reports? And all of this are important and challenging questions. It's not simple. And we have to honestly evaluate and disclose results. That sometimes it involves ruining somebody's poster. Scientific study versus research or witness interviews. We really ought to be collecting and recording data on multiple instruments. The main reason for this is to ensure that the instruments are not in error. When you are testing a hypothesis that you have an a priori belief is going to be very improbable, then if you have a situation where it is more probable that the data is in error than it is for the data to be supporting this hypothesis, you will never be able to prove or show support for that hypothesis. So we really need multiple instruments. We need to have proper handling of methodology, data, and results. In science, we share data, we share information. Safe sharing and communication of methodology, best practices, as well as data is important. That's one of the hallmarks of science. I personally know all of the scientists who are working, academic scientists working to study UAPs around the world. I know basically what they're doing. I know what their methods are. I have some idea about their best practices, and I know about their data, and they know about ours. We talk to each other, we work together. And this is one thing about science that people don't really appreciate. Science brings people together in a way that no other activity can. We check our work with other trusted scientists. We don't just have peer review in a journal, we check our work with each other. Look, I got these interesting results. Will you look this over? We do this with each other all the time. And we're honest with each other. If we think that somebody has messed up, we point that out and help each other along. We publish our methods, data, and results in peer-reviewed talks and papers. And we typically do this before we talk publicly about it. You, as a scientist, you make sure you know what you're talking about before you go public with it. Social media is not the primary method of dissemination and disclosure. It is not what scientists do. you don't dump your data, or which people usually consist of mean images or videos, on social media. That is not the first thing you do. That is not the hallmark of real science. Again, we're taking all the fun out of it. So this is a code of conduct. It actually came from, we got this from UC Berkeley, and I think it's pretty much summarizes what's to be done. It's from a paper on, it's from a research paper on cold fusion. And I'll mention cold fusion as an example of what not to do and show how things can go very badly wrong. So some of you may remember the whole cold fusion debacle from the late 80s, like 1989 or so. What do scientists do? Number one, they pay attention to what other people have already done. Number two, you expose your ideas to testing. You test your ideas, you double check, triple check, and more. 3, you assimilate the evidence. You take into account all the evidence you can. And 4, you openly communicate ideas and tests to others. You check each other's work, run it past colleagues. And number 5, you play fair. You act with scientific integrity. I mentioned, now this came from a paper on cold fusion, so this is worth looking at again. We have the whole problem with nuclear fusion in a bottle, or a jar here, where you put in a platinum rod and a palladium rod in heavy water and hook it to a battery. And this was supposed to be creating nuclear fusion, according to Drs. Pons and Fleischmann. And here is a Time magazine front. They made Time magazine, and not the way you want to. Fusion or illusion, how 2 obscure chemists stirred excitement and outrage in the scientific world. And let's see. Christian, is everything going okay?
Absolutely. It's perfect.
All right, wonderful. I heard a little ding, and I was wanting to make sure that things were working. I only see my screen, so I can't see if anything's going wrong.
It's more people coming in. It's always a good sign.
No, that's a fine thing. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, UFO people. Race back to that slide. Welcome all the new people. I shouldn't have done this. This is way too many slides. But now I can't back out now. I'm already invested. There we go. Welcome more people. And we race ahead. Back to scientists messing up. All right. So what did these guys do wrong? They did basically everything wrong, which is really kind of shocking when you go through it. The interesting thing is that cold fusion the effect is still studied. The effect turns out to be real, but we don't understand it, and we don't recognize it as a real effect. Why? Because they messed it up so badly it's become taboo. This is a problem, and I worry about this personally with people coming in who are half-heartedly doing science to study UAPs, or they call it science, and I'm afraid they're going to mess it up. And if we're at a delicate stage where scientists dive on this problem, I'm convinced we can figure this out and we can make some real headway. But if people dive in and mess this up, we can absolutely go right back to where we started, which is worrisome to me. Which is why I don't really pull punches with people who are dumping their data on social media. So how did Pons and Fleischmann get it wrong? Number one, they didn't pay attention to what other people have done. Their lack of knowledge about nuclear physics and the refusal to collaborate with other experts hindered their study. They didn't realize that nuclear fusion is going to produce neutrons and that they should have been trying to detect neutrons. They were just trying to detect extra energy by measuring the temperature of the water. That's basically what they did. 2, they didn't expose their ideas to testing. They didn't test their work very well, although it would have been easy. They refused to let other scientists look for fusion products in their experiment. 3, assimilate the evidence. Despite the evidence against it, they refused to give up on the idea of the reaction being nuclear fusion. 4, they did not openly communicate their ideas and test to others. They refused to share their detailed test results with other scientists. They got no problem going and having a press, a big press conference and announcing to the world that they've discovered nuclear fusion, but they won't let scientists look at it. There's a problem there, very clear. And 5, play fair. They actually were working with a third effect, working with a third scientist, and who was studying who was also studying the effect with them. They broke their agreement with that third person. I don't even know the guy's name. I'm assuming he's a guy. I shouldn't do that either. I don't even know this other scientist's name. But they basically held a press conference and published without that third person. So they did basically everything wrong. And as a result, the studies of cold fusion are really underground. Almost nobody does it. Nobody knows anything about it. It's a shame. So much of our paper and this talk is focused on number 1, pay attention to what other people have already done. That's absolutely important to know what other people have done. So we're going to talk about the scientific study of UAPs and what's actually been done. It's good to know what's been done so you know what works and you know what to do and what not to do. And along the way, we're going to dispel the whole list of myths. So myth 1, there is no literature to study. Well, our paper, which you can access here, you can just Google Knuth UAP, and it's stored on our physics archive, RARXIV. Was one place to download it. Our paper has over 500 citations. So if you download our paper and read it, which is a heavy lift to start with, you can then go read all 500 citations. There's plenty of literature to study. Most sources aren't peer-reviewed. I don't know how many I've heard that. Oh my God, this is a horrible. Of course, as a scientist, of course, you want your work peer-reviewed. But let's take a minute and have some of that scientific honesty. What does peer review really consist of? For my journal, Entropy, I'm the editor-in-chief. Excuse me. As editor-in-chief, I require that our papers are reviewed by at least 3 people. That does not always happen. Sometimes it's 2. And I usually scold my editorial assistants for not getting 3, and have many times made them go back and get a third person and delayed publishing of the paper, which the publishing company does not like, because they want the papers to be published quickly, so we have good metrics that make people want to publish in our journal. But I will make them go back and get a third reviewer, because we need at least 3 people reviewing the papers. But what's that? So what that means is the peer-reviewed paper was checked by 3 other academics. 3 people. Is that enough, really, to assure that the paper is reasonable and good and they did everything right? Probably not. But it's practical. In some cases, like the physics journal Physical Review, the paper is reviewed by 1 person. 1 person reviewed it and complained about something. That's basically what happens. So peer review is not always as rigorous as academics would like to think, and that honesty is important. And then I would have to ask that academic, have you ever had your work peer reviewed? And did the reviewer do a good job? Really? No. 9 times out of 10, the reviewer says something stupid or thinks something stupid about your work, misunderstood it, didn't really read it carefully enough, didn't do a good job thinking about it. And so peer review is not always as great as we would like it to be. That's a problem with peer review, and it needs to be made better. But to scientists who don't want to read a paper on UFOs because it wasn't peer reviewed, my real response to this is, really? You need it to be read by 3 anonymous people before you're going to read it? Are you telling me that you're incapable of evaluating this work by yourself? Because you're not speaking highly of yourself right now. And I'm not thinking highly of you either. So the other thing you often hear is, I don't have time to read nonsense. Well, let's be honest. One cannot express a professional opinion without being familiar with the work. Period. you would not accept that from one of your grad students. And so you really should keep your mouth shut until you've done your homework. Do your homework, educate yourself, and then you can express a professional opinion. How many science popularizers do we know who've made jokes about UFOs and talked about how silly they are, and then when asked about whether they've looked into a case or read a paper, said, no, I haven't. I haven't really researched it. There's nothing there to study. Nothing's peer-reviewed. They make all the complaints, but they're still professing their professional opinion. It's nonsense. All right, so here's a little introduction to our paper. I'm very proud that our paper has people from, some very serious people from the field. And I'm going to briefly mention how this came about so that you know how this happened. So this paper was published in Progress in Aerospace Sciences. It's a peer-reviewed academic journal, and it has a rather high impact factor that I'm happy about. I usually don't care about impact factors, but here I care because it's much higher than what we get in most physics journals. So an impact factor basically is typically calculated by how many papers are published, I think, per year that reference this paper or reference a paper from the journal. So it's a measure for the journal. So so it says that papers published in this journal will be referenced about 11.5 times per year. Something that's kind of what the number means. So what had happened was we had been working on this paper here, the center one, that was first authored by Matthew Shadagas, myself, Benjamin Kugielski, and Cecilia Levy, who's also a professor at Albany. And this paper summarized our results from our first field expedition of the Albany UAPX collaboration to study unidentified anomalous phenomena. So this was our trip to Catalina, where we worked to collect data on UAPs, and this paper summarizes that work. And in the course of writing this paper and having it reviewed by this journal, the editor-in-chief of the journal said, well, you guys should really write a section on summarizing the scientific study of UAPs. And of course, Matthew gets that email and sighs, oh God, more work to do to get this paper published. He's working and answering other questions that the reviewers had about the paper. So he asked me, he goes, Kevin, could you write a section on the scientific study of UAPs? And, oh, sure, I can do that. We'll write a couple paragraphs. And this is how it started. So I start writing and just went on autopilot. And before I knew it, I had like 3 or 4 pages written. And I thought, wow, this is already too big for our paper. And I'm not sure how we're going to fit it in either. It doesn't really fit into the flow of the document. And I haven't covered everything yet. So what am I going to do? I got to knock it down to a few paragraphs, but I haven't even looked at some of the things I want to talk about yet. So I told Matthew, I said, we have a bit of a problem. I've already written too much. I think by the time I sent it to him, it actually had about 10 pages written. Yes, I had gotten a bit out of control. I was excited about the project and sent it to him. I said, this is way too long for our paper. I don't see how to put this into our paper as a couple paragraphs. And so Matthew suggested, well, let's contact the editor-in-chief and see if maybe we could take what you've written and submit it as an additional paper that we can point to, actually write another paper. All right, that's a good idea. So the editor-in-chief actually really liked the idea because he was planning on having a special issue with our paper in it and a couple of other papers. One of those other papers, which we didn't know about at the time, was written by Jacques Vallée, Luc Denis, and Jeffrey Mischerski on the estimates of radiative energy values and ground-level observations of UFO with considering new physical data. So this is an object that was seen, or the light from the object was seen coming from a clearing in a forest by a physicist who was driving down the highway in northern northern Louisiana. And the physicist noted that the light coming from the object in the forest was brighter than his headlights on the road, and was able to do some quick calculations in his mind and thought, oh my God, this is like megawatts of energy. I got to get out of here. He got scared and he left the area, turned around and drove away from it. And then this was studied later, and the clearing was found where the object had landed, and it had burnt the trees. And so Jacques Vallée, Luc Denis, and Jeffrey Mischersky have been studying the burnt tree bark to get better estimates of how luminous the UFO was. So this had been accepted for publication as well, and the editor-in-chief wanted to have a special issue with some papers on UAPs. So he agreed for me to write this paper on the science of unidentified anomalous phenomena. And I quickly realized that I was in over my head. First, like I mentioned before, there are multiple groups currently studying UAPs, and I did not want to summarize somebody else's work. It really is better for them to write their own work, because I would really want to do it justice. And so I contacted many of those individuals to have them write up what they've been doing. So if I, you can see some of these people here, and I'll mention their efforts later. Eamon Ansbro and his work in Ireland, Wes Waters and Laura Domine both helped me out with the Galileo project work. You had Erling Strand wrote about his work with the Hestelin, and Massimo Teodorani wrote about the Hestelin project in Norway. And then you have Hakan Kayal wrote about his work on IFIX in Germany, and Beatrix Villarroya wrote about her Vasco project in Sweden. And I'll mention those all later. And the project grew and grew and grew. And at some point I realized, oh my God, I've talked all about what the United States has done. And I got a lot of help from Robert Powell and Michael Swords on that work, and realized I don't know anything about what the French have done. So I contacted Baptiste Frescourt, Luc Denis, and about Knuth and others who really, Michael Valiant, who really helped me put that together. And Eduardo Russo helped me with some of the European and Russian, and they helped with the Russian and Chinese as well. And so we really together put together a fantastic paper. This took about 9 months of work. And I haven't mentioned everybody, they're all listed here, but everybody was very valuable in putting this together. So the total number of authors comes out to be 34 people, representing 7 nations. The archive version of the paper is almost 200 pages. The published version is 58. Oh, they use small font and double columns, and they can work magic on saving paper. The total number of references for the published version is 506 references. And working together, it took us about 9 months to write this paper. So it really was a tour de force. I came to call it the behemoth because it was almost as big as my PhD thesis, and it really took a lot of effort, but it was worth doing, and I'm glad we did it. And one of the things that this really points out, and the author list really points out, that this is a global effort to study a global phenomenon, and the author list really helps make that case. And here's where you really come to realize that science unites humanity in ways that no other institution can. We're all studying the same phenomena. We're not basing things on belief. We're trying to look at data, collecting evidence. We're constrained by the physical world as to what we can say. And in this way, science really works to unify humanity. And that's one thing that I've really come to appreciate about science. One way to download the paper is to just Google Knuth Lab. You can go to knuthlab.org and you'll see a little icon of UAP studies with the UFO coming out of the water. You can click on that and it'll go right to a place where you can download both of our papers, my paper here with Matthew and the New Science of UAP Studies. You can download those there. To get Jacques Vallée's paper, you're going to have to go to the journal. All right. All right. I always want to do better. So what do I regret? I do have some regrets, and they just couldn't be accommodated. Yes, I'm missing authors and detailed information from the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, South and Central America, China, Southeast Asia, and India. And I regret not being able to know more about the Chinese, the Russian, the Soviet Unions, and some of the American efforts. I barely mentioned South and Central America and UK, Australia, New Zealand. I would have liked to have done that. There's an opening for somebody else. Somebody else could step in and write an amazing paper on what's going on in those places. That would be fantastic. And I'm missing some discussion about work from other key individuals. However, more time and more authors and coverage would have made the paper larger, which would have made it unpublishable. When I sent the 200-page draft to the editor-in-chief, I thought, there is no way, this is a paper journal. They have an online version, but they also publish it in paper. There's no way they're going to publish this. This is not going to be accepted. I was terrified. It would be not only unpublishable, but unreadable. Who's going to read something more than 200 pages? While I regret including some of this information, not including it makes this paper, makes it doable. It made it work. So I view this as an opportunity for someone else, not me. I'm done writing about this. I want to go back to collecting data on UAP. Now, I need to note that this paper adds to earlier and contemporary important some other summaries about the field, and these are some of the notable summaries. Philippe Aileris has written a couple papers on UAPs, 50 years of the local SETI, 50 years of field experiments, and then his second paper is published in Limina. Gretchen Stallman has written a paper talking about the information gap in UAP studies, and Michael Swords and Robert Powell's in their book on UFOs in government, a historical inquiry, was instrumental in me getting my head around at all what the U.S. government has done on this. So this is, if you want to learn more about that, this is a great place to look. Beatrix Villarroel and her colleague Kevin Kriskiunas has written a paper on an astronomer's guide to UAP research, civilian astronomer's guide to UAP research, and of course Wes Waters and Avi Loeb and the Galileo Project in their paper on the scientific investigation of UAPs using multimodal ground-based observations. They have summarized a lot of the work that's been done. So these are also good. There's plenty of literature to read, not just our paper, but here's 6 more that you can read. So have at it. All right, so that's one myth dispelled. There's plenty of stuff to read. Hopefully some of our science popularizers will find the time to do so before they open their mouths and make jokes about UAPs again. Another myth is that UFOs are an American problem starting in 1947. It has been discussed quite a few places how similar sightings date back to antiquity, flying shields in ancient Rome. Our paper purposefully starts with the mysterious aircraft in Scandinavia from 1933 to 34 to basically dispel this mystery. We do mention that there are reports from antiquity, but we don't spend time there. we spend the time with Scandinavia, and then we go into World War II, where they were seen across Europe and in the South Pacific. And in addition to describing what the Americans have done, we talk about what the French have done, the Canadians, the Russians, and the Chinese. And the French, it was really important because I had contacted the my French co-authors, as noted, and asked them to write a couple pages, and they sent me about 40 pages. They too got excited and sent about 40 pages of detail, which Baptiste Freescourt was very generous with his time and helped me summarize that work into something that I could add to our paper. But that 40-page document could be blown up into another paper describing just the French efforts, which I think would be worth doing. And to note that this is not just an American problem, I want to point out, I'm going to point this out later, that the 2023 UAP Task Force report put out by the United States was only 17 pages long, which is kind of shameful when you consider that the 1999 French Cometa report was over 90 pages. So come on, Americans, we know more about what's going on than 17 pages. I think we can do better. The French certainly have. Thank you for that. So what's this 1947 business and what happened there? Well, that certainly was an American thing. A lot of sightings happened in America during a 2-week period in 1947. And when you look at the details here, this is the data from Ted Pletcher's 1967 report on the UFO wave of 1947. You see something really striking. This is a histogram of UFO sightings reported in newspapers from mid-June through mid-July of 1947 in the United States. What's going on here? This is pretty amazing. The spike goes from being around 7, I think the average is something like 7 reports per day until you get to about June 24th, June 25th, and then it starts rising and goes up into a peak a week later and then drops off again. That's really pretty striking. And it's even, when you start to look at the statistics, it's even more striking than you realize. So what was going on? Well, there's a lot going on. A lot of the cases that you know about happened in 1947. So the Maury Island case, which included debris being dumped from a UFO, happened on the 20th of June. Kenneth Arnold's observation of craft near Mount Rainier happened on June 24th. The purported crash in Roswell happened right there near July 4th. So there's a lot happening during these 2 weeks. And while it's easy to suspect that maybe Kenneth Arnold's observations and the Bimini reported started some kind of sociological effect that caused people to look up and start seeing things in the sky, I don't know if you can rule that hypothesis out easily. As sociologists might need to look at that more closely. I'm a physicist, so that's not my wheelhouse, so to say. So here we are. Here's Kenneth Arnold holding up a artist creation of what he saw near Mount Rainier, one of the 9 objects he observed. This is actually on B is one of the 2 photographs of an object taken by William Albert Rhodes on July 7th in Phoenix, Arizona. These 2 objects are seen in different parts of the country within 2 weeks of each other, but they're pretty similar to each other. This has some kind of crescent boomerang shape. This seems to have some of the similar shape. There was some circular structure here. You can see a similar structure in this photograph. Are these the same object? I don't know. We could be dealing with hawk moth and hummingbird again, or they could be the same type of object. Hard to know without knowing the details. One reason why photographs aren't entirely helpful by themselves. I wanted to include other photographs. This is Bob Young's photograph of a UFO over Catalina Island on July 8th, same period of time. And this is the photograph I found. However, this appears to be the negative of the photograph. The UFO was seen and photographed at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. This is not a 1 p.m. in the afternoon. It's like a day for night scene. This is not 1 p.m. in the afternoon. It looks like a negative. So since I doubted that I had a faithful copy of the original photo, I didn't include this photo in the paper. Again, we scientists try to be honest. Yes, I would have loved to include this in the paper. I couldn't. In fact, Matthew Shadagas, in reviewing the paper, one of the many times he did, noted that there were too few figures and pictures in the paper, which spurred me to look for more. And but I resisted putting this in the paper. What's needed? This is something that's needed. So if somebody's looking for something to do, we need a scientific website dedicated to vetted, as best as possible, UFO imagery and videos with accompanying metadata, context, and sources and links if possible. It takes a lot of work to scour the internet for UFO photos that you then can have enough information that you decide that they're reasonable. And that's a bit of a problem. So if this were to be made, I think that would be helpful. So back to what happened in 47. This is now pretty interesting. So July 8th, that was Bob Young's photograph. So this is the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. So the UFO over Catalina Island, which is where we had our initial Albany UAPX survey, that happened on this day here. So that's the same location as the Nimitz encounter, right, for this photograph here in Catalina Island. So this is all happening during the same peak. Let's look at this peak a little more closely. Let's look at the statistics. Oh my God, there's math, something else that scientists love to do that scares people away. Here you have a background rate in early June of about 7.2 sightings per day. If you look at the standard deviation of that, it's about 7.2 to 7.86. So the mean is about here with a standard deviation going up to about the red line. So this is what we call a Poisson process. For a rare event, the mean value is about equal to the standard deviation, the variance close to related to that. So this is similar to a Poisson process. But then all of a sudden it goes, starting around the 24th or so of June, this thing skyrockets into what looks like a nice Gaussian curve and a normal distribution, which is what I have plotted here in blue. And in fact, this is what I did. I took this equation here, the number of UFOs is given by a normal distribution or a Gaussian distribution running plus a constant. So there's some constant level of observation plus a peak of that happened. And if I do this fit, the amplitude of this peak comes out to be 148 sightings. The constant rate comes out to be about 8 sightings per day. And that's pretty significant. So statistically, if we know that the average rate has a standard deviation of about 6.86, what does this peak represent? This peak represents a deviation of, if you call this 1 sigma, this is about 21.6 sigma. This is a giant signal. In physics, when you are doing particle physics and you're verifying a phenomenon, if you have a deviation of 5 sigma, it's considered to be significant. This is 21 sigma. This is off the charts significant. Is it sociology? I can't say whether that's it. I don't think it is, and here's why. When you look at Ted Bletcher's report and you see what was actually reported, the reports are quite varied, and the types of what's observed are varied, and their locations are varied. So here's a list of some, and this is really only some of the 150 sightings in this, or 200, 300 sightings in that time period. July 3rd, there was a landing of 8 large objects with 10 witnesses in Idaho. July 4th, there were 35 objects in 3 formations that 60 people saw in Twin Falls, Idaho. This is the same day as the Roswell crash. Really? That's pretty significant. There's a lone disk in the sky with 200 witnesses in Spokane, Washington. There are 2 groups of disks with an entire United Airlines crew that observed these 2 groups of disks from the airplane near the Idaho-Oregon border. There were disks over Portland, Oregon, with dozens of police and people who saw them. There's more air-to-air sightings by 2 pilots in California and Idaho. There's a photo taken by a Coast Guardsman in Washington, a disc over Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans, 20-plus discs over Port Huron, Michigan, with multiple witnesses. It's all the same day that the Roswell crash happened on. How silly is this really? This seems pretty significant to me, especially when we see that this is 21 Sigma. It's hard to believe that all of these sightings with these multiple witnesses all are happening because of some sociological craziness that was induced by Kenneth Arnold seeing 9 objects flying around Rainier in Washington. I find that hard to believe. July 5th, there's a propeller-shaped object, not even a disk, totally different shape, seen by 2 TWA pilots in Ohio. July 6th, there's a B-26 pilot and crew observe a disk pacing off its left wing in Clay Center, Kansas. 1:45 in the afternoon. Mid-afternoon, seen by a pilot and crew of a B-26 bomber in Kansas. What did Hynek call this? He said it was astronomical. Yeah, there should be laughing. He was a complicated, people are complicated. People are not simple. He was reaching for explanations because he wanted one. That's the only reason. There was a landing near Tempe, Arizona. There's a landing near Pocatello, Idaho. I don't think this is a sociological peak. Something else is going on. Maybe people were paying more attention, but what they're seeing seems to be real. This is interesting. One thing we did not discuss in the paper, we did not discuss Roswell. We stayed away from that. People will just laugh if you mention Roswell and talk about it. Roswell would require a whole paper itself. And we don't really have the necessary data to make claims about what Roswell was. We can figure out what Roswell wasn't. Claims of Project Mogul are absolute nonsense. They did not launch a balloon in June. The weather was bad, and according to the principal investigator's notes from New York University, who was running Project Mogul, he said they did not launch a balloon in June. And so it could not be a Project Mogul balloon that crash landed on the ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, those balloons were being launched near Roswell, but you're to have me believe that you're launching a balloon that's going to go 50,000 feet up into the air and then just hang over that county in New Mexico for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then fall straight down onto a ranch? That's what the Pentagon wants us to believe. Really? Have they heard of the jet stream at all? You would think the Air Force would have. Kirkpatrick's Aero report would have failed, capital letters failed, academic peer review, not even an F+. I'm going to quote quantum physicist John Bell: professional physicists ought to be able to do better. Yes, I'm being professionally critical of Kirkpatrick. I have done my homework and I can't open my mouth. Sorry, not sorry. So now we have another myth. Scientists do not see and certainly don't study UFOs. This is an AI image. Don't get excited about it. All the cute pictures I used OpenArt AI to quick make nice pictures for me. And I found that to be handy. Scientists saw and set up groups to study green fireballs back in the late 1940s. So from November of 1948 through 1951, there were green fireballs were being observed near Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Los Alamos. And they called in meteorite expert Dr. Lincoln LaPasse to basically study these objects, thinking they're probably meteors. LaPasse, being a meteor expert, very quickly came to the conclusion that they were not meteors. And this is an important thing for scientists to realize, most of the scientists at Los Alamos had seen them. Edward Teller, inventor of the H-bomb, had seen them as well. He thought them to be natural electromagnetic phenomena, but this is basically what was going on. This is right from our paper. I'm going to do one of the no-nos from giving talks in physics is you don't read from your paper, especially in physics, because there's equations and nobody wants to hear that. But basically, the UFO activity at both White Sands Missile Base in Los Alamos and New Mexico resulted in the formation of informal groups of scientists in both places to study the phenomenon. One member wrote, "A group of our physicists set up watches to observe and record the mysterious green fireballs. As watching progressed, we armed ourselves with a camera and grating to try to photograph the spectrum of light. We set up a Doppler meter detector and a low-frequency electromagnetic listening and recording device." They were trying to record these things. They were studying them informally. The group consisted of 10 physicists, many of whom had witnessed these objects themselves. Fred Kalbach described their efforts to James McDonald, an atmospheric physicist at University of Arizona who studied UFOs, saying, "The sightings were so numerous that a group of us staff members produced a reporting form and encouraged those who saw these events to fill out the checklist. Over a period of, say, 3 months, we collected possibly 50 reports. I've personally attempted to follow up on some of the reports of others only to conclude that there are many things which," I can't actually read this because my thing is here. Here we go. I've got a little alert from Google Meet on the bottom of my screen. Here, now, let's see. "There are many things which competent observers have seen which cannot be explained in terms of our present knowledge." So these things were studied. Were studied informally by scientists who wanted to know what was going on. So while the government is constantly telling us, "Oh, there's nothing to see here, this has been studied, there's nothing to see here," the scientists who have worked on these projects, who worked on other projects, have felt this to be important. So another meeting involving LaPasse, Kaplan, Teller, and Stanislaw Ulam, who physicists will recognize, mathematicians as well, along with military officials and FBI agents, was arranged at Los Alamos on October 14th, 1949. Again, there was no agreed upon explanation for the green fireballs, but their concentration around Los Alamos and Sandia Labs was not only unnatural, but ominous. That's where they were being seen. People were still trying to claim that they're meteors. Let's review what meteor showers are about. We know about meteors, and in fact, meteors originally were thought to be mythical things themselves. Rocks falling from the sky was thought to be mythical and nonsense in the 1800s, but we now know that that's real, and this is a similar type of phenomenon. But when you have a meteor shower like the Perseids, which we just had, the Earth in its orbit is passing through a cloud of usually cometary debris that's orbiting the sun. So we cross that orbit every year, and so at the same time every year we'll have a meteor shower in beginning of August or mid-August. So this is what a meteor shower is. Now, when you're in a meteor shower, it's global. These meteors will fall down all over the planet. You can see a meteor shower everywhere on the planet, not just around Los Alamos and Sandia Labs. That's a problem. That's the first hint that something's wrong. Meteor showers are not concentrated to a county in New Mexico. And a meteor shower will last for a day or so and then stop as the Earth moves in its orbit out of that area where the debris is. Meteor shower will not start and last for 3 years in a county in New Mexico and then suddenly stop. That's not a meteor shower. And Dr. Lincoln LaPasse knew this. He also noted that the green color of the fireballs was not the same green color of meteors when they're green. They did do some work where they tried to collect, with an airplane, tried to collect samples in the air after there was a green fireball sighting, and they did have some success with that and detected copper. Now, which would be green if it's burning up. Now, Lincoln LaPaz was an expert in taking sightings of meteors and plotting the trajectory and then going to find the meteor. That's what he did for his career. And he tried this with green fireballs and never found a crashed meteor. And in some cases, he had very good trajectories with multiple witnesses. So the fact that he never found a fireball on the ground was strange. Furthermore, some of the green fireballs were observed going upward. That was another problem. So this was such a big problem that by February of 1950, Project Twinkle was established to study the green fireballs. They basically aimed to employ 3 cinetheodolite stations. These are basically, cine means you've got a movie recorder, so they've got a movie camera hooked up to a telescope. That the theodolites were used to study missile launches. And so these types of stations were used to study missile launches. And so they wanted to employ 3 of these things near White Sands, New Mexico, but there was an insufficient budget, sound familiar, and unavailability of cinetheodolites resulted in only 1 station being constructed. And they made the mistake of just instead of planting it there and just watching around the clock, they moved it around and always missed the phenomenon. So never collected any real useful data. Project Twinkle concluded in 1951, having learned essentially nothing. However, the final project report glossed over an important set of observations, specifically the details of the report of 4 objects which were photographed during the test of an MX-776A missile on April 27, 1950 were missing. So that document about that test of that missile noted, I'm starting with point 2 because point 1 didn't matter too much. Film from station P10 was read, resulting in azimuthal and elevation angles being recorded on 4 objects. In addition, size on film was recorded. From this information, together with a single azimuthal angle from station M7, the following conclusions were drawn. The objects were at an altitude of approximately 150,000 feet. That is way up there. When the Tic Tacs were first observed by Senior Chief Kevin Day on the USS Princeton in the Nimitz case, he would see them appear on his radar at 80,000 feet, half the altitude. These things were really high. So 5,000 feet in a mile, so you're talking about 30 miles up. You're halfway to space at this point, well out of most of the atmosphere. The objects were over the Holloman Range between the base and Tularosa Peak. The objects were approximately 30 feet in diameter, and they were traveling at an undeterminable yet high speed. Instead, Project Twinkle final report doesn't mention any of that, merely states some photographic activity occurred on April 27th and May 24th, but simultaneous sightings by both cameras were not made, so no information was gained. Yeah. There's a lot of not wanting to look at the data, not wanting to look through that telescope. But the scientists were trying to study them informally, and were using lots of instruments to do so. Here's another case. This is an interesting case. This is an illustration drawn by a draftsman from NACA, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was the predecessor to NASA. He actually worked at the wind tunnel at Moffett Field, where NASA Ames is right now. So there were 5 adults boating on the Rogue River in Oregon in May of 1949. There's 2 of those 5 people worked for NACA. One of them worked in the wind tunnel, and the other was a draftsman. So they were both aerospace engineers. So you've got 2 aerospace engineers familiar with aerodynamic design, actually watched this object fly through the area was visible for about 5 minutes. They had a pair of binoculars that they passed around, so they got to see it through binoculars. And this is actually drawn by the NACA draftsman, who, as a job, drafts airplanes, right? So this was their sighting. Project Blue Book looked into this and interviewed them and declared it to be an airplane. So there you go. The NACA aerospace engineers knew this wasn't an airplane, claimed it wasn't an airplane, yet Project Blue Book said it was an airplane. We can see how silly this becomes when you really look at it. Aerospace engineers have seen UFOs, yes. Scientists get together to try to understand them at times. Professor Peter Strzok from Stanford University in 1997 organized the Pocantico, I can never say that, Pocantico workshop at the Pocantico Conference Center in Tarrytown, New York. That basically is the same place. That's Sleepy Hollow. You might know Sleepy Hollow from the stories. That's Tarrytown, New York. So they held this conference there in 1997, and when you can read about it here in Peter Strzok's book, The UFO Enigma. This is really worth reading. They've got papers written by the scientists who presented there, plus the panelists. So there was a review panel of scientists who were having the presentations made to them, and the review panel, tried to decide whether what was going on was interesting or not. And I felt that this workshop stands as a refreshing and unique example of how the scientific community can be brought in and introduced to this complicated UFO problem. So the review panel consisted of 9 minimally biased scientists who were introduced to the UFO research performed by the scientific investigators. The investigators did their best at presenting a scientific case to the review panel. The review panel ultimately gave a fair and rational response to the presentations, and ultimately agreed that the UFO problem was a worthy topic of scientific study and was in need of institutional support back in 1997. So I'm going to read a little bit about Peter Strzok's description of the meeting, because I think that's helpful to see how fraught these discussions can be, but how you can actually make it work. So he writes that the proceedings began on Tuesday morning. No one quite knew what to expect. The investigators no doubt hoped for sincere appreciation of the results of their long efforts under difficult circumstances to address a recalcitrant problem. The panel members probably hoped for clear, crisp presentations, and the moderators hoped that they could keep things moving. I should note that several of my co-authors on our paper were at this meeting, and some of them may be in the guests here today. I don't know. I can't see that list right now. Professor Strzok continues, the director hoped that during the exchange, each side would quickly develop an appreciation for and understanding of the other side, and that the panel members would rapidly assimilate the information that the investigators planned to present. No one got everything they wanted. On the first day, some got much less than they wanted. The panel's members seemed to feel that the presentations were poorly prepared and poorly presented, and the investigators may have felt that the panel members were overly critical and overly academic. That's not too surprising. He says, at the end of the first day, the investigators were invited to leave the meeting room so the panel could meet in an executive session, and the first crisis occurred. The panel members could and did speak their minds, and it was immediately very clear that some members of the panel were concerned about what they'd gotten themselves into. If every participant at the meeting had gone off to his own hotel for the evening and night, the second day might have begun on a rather sour note. Fortunately, all the participants spent a very pleasant evening together, and we convened on Wednesday morning somewhat sadder, but definitely wiser than we had been when we all arrived on Monday afternoon. No one bailed out. The review picked up speed on Wednesday and got into stride on Thursday. The panel members had probably become more realistic in their expectations, and we're beginning to appreciate the complexity of the UFO problem. And the investigators had come to realize that they had a tough audience, and they attempted to rise to the challenge. So this really is an inspiring example of how a meeting like this was able to work. And and I appreciate that he says this, that he notes that the panelists were beginning to appreciate the complexity of the UFO problem. I think that's one of the difficulties that we face, is that, and I think that we have it within the UFO community as well, it's not appreciated how difficult this problem is. There are always some individuals who think, well, it's simple, it's lights in the sky, it's a misidentification, it's this, it's that. Of course, you've got this skeptical beliefs, or the quick knee-jerk skeptical reactions or interpretations of what's going on. And it's not that simple, it's quite complicated. But then on the UFO side, you have a lot of people who believe it's quite simple. Well, they're clearly aliens from another planet. That's not clear either. It's complicated. It's really messy and really complicated when you start digging into this. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to realize and keep in mind. Now, the scientific panel concluded, excuse me, and these conclusions are quite reasonable. The UFO problem is not a simple one, and it is unlikely that there's any simple universal answer. We've heard this from UFO people who have been studying this. Jacques Vallée is a great example of this, when who's pointed out that the idea that UFOs are alien spacecrafts from other planets is not the simplest answer. It's not universal. It's not going to work for everything. And I think that's true and important to keep in mind. Another conclusion was, whenever there are unexplained observations, there is the possibility that scientists will learn something new by studying these observations. Very true, very interesting, and reasonable. Scientists should concentrate on cases which include as much independent physical evidence as possible and strong witness testimony. Yes, consider both. I like that. And get as much physical evidence as you can. Some form of formal regular contact between the UFO community and physical scientists could be productive. It's just even better having physical scientists study UFOs, which is what we're now seeing happening, which I really appreciate. It is desirable that there be institutional support for research in this area. That would be helpful. It would be nice to be able to apply for grants to study these phenomena, just like I apply for grants to study exoplanets. I should note, seen great support from my administrators and colleagues at the University at Albany, and I'm thankful for that. I just this year won a distinguished research award for my work in studying UAPs, given to me by the president of the university, which was shocking to see that would happen. There was a time when I started this thinking that I'd be thrown out for studying these things.
Kevin, can I quickly ask how much of those wonderful slides we're still expecting? Because we've been kind of 90 minutes in it, and I just thought it would be great to have a Q&A, and even though I know that you could go on.
Yes, I think we will have time for a Q&A. We're more than halfway through. Oh,
okay, that's good. All right. So if everybody is still attentive, that would be great. So we have.
It's okay.
You've been talking 1.5 hours without catching breath. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a little scary. Yes.
Well, it speaks.
I should go back to my screen. I'm now infinite. Okay.
All right.
Very good. Yes. So, and I appreciate that they mentioned the Capon separate projects of CNES in France. Has provided a valuable model for an effective organization for collecting and analyzing UFO observations related data. And they they also noted that, reflecting on evidence presented at the workshop, that some witnesses of UFO events have suffered radiation-type injuries, and the panel draws the attention of the medical community to possible health risk associated with UFO events. So they They clearly were well educated in the topic in the few days and came to some reasonable conclusions. Peter Sturrock continues, actually before, this was 20 years before, in 1977, he surveyed astronomers of the American Astronomical Society. Do scientists see or study UFOs? Certainly astronomers would see them. They look at the sky all the time. Well, first, not all astronomers observe the sky. Many of them collect data from orbiting space telescopes or telescopes on mountains. They aren't looking through those telescopes physically or staring at the sky. But Peter Sturrock surveyed 2,600 questionnaires were mailed to members of the American Astronomical Society. 1,356 were returned. 34 were returned anonymously. 13 of the 1,300 respondents were critical of the survey. Only 13 of them. So that's what are we looking at? That's like it's 1%, right? 1% were critical. 34 respondents offered to help. 3 times as many offered to help. 7 respondents indicated that they were already actively studying UFOs. So this is really quite interesting. So do astronomers see them? Yes, they do. Are they interested in studying them? Some are and do. Yes, they do it quietly. 62 respondents had witnessed or obtained an instrumental recording of an unknown object in the survey. 63% of those people who reported events were night observers. 50% of the respondents who did not report events were night observers. And so this was, you work out the statistics here, that says that 5.7% of night observers, astronomers, have reported an event. And 3.3% of non-night observers reported an event. So you're going to be twice as likely to see a UFO if you're a night observing astronomer, apparently, according to the survey. So yes, astronomers do see them. In fact, you know, I always hear, oh, they look through telescopes all the time, they should see UFOs. You don't see, the telescope has such a narrow field of view. And when a scientist says this to me, my head almost explodes. Kind of like, do you know how a telescope works? They have such a narrow field of view. You're barely looking at any of the sky. You probably never see, I've never even seen an airplane through a telescope. Now, I should note that Matthew Shadagas, my colleague at Albany, was on a data collection mission just this last May, and he actually saw a what you might describe as a large plasma-like orb, and he actually watched it through a telescope, which he said looked like a giant ball of fire, which is amazing. Another myth is that our governments have looked into UFOs and found nothing. The Colorado or Condon report was not carefully conducted. And that was mentioned by Mike, I think, when he was introducing me. During a wave of UFO sightings in 1966, there were prominent sightings in Michigan. The director of Project Blue Book, Major Hector Quintanilla, pushed Hynek to issue a statement debunking the sightings. And this is where Hynek describes the sightings as swamp gas. This is how it all started, swamp gas, which denigrated the Michigan citizenry who observed these objects, made them angry, made Speaker of the House Gerald Ford angry, and Ford decided to make a public affair of this and humiliated the Air Force. And the Air Force suggested that they'd be willing to cooperate with some independent research institution to explore the subject and report back to public and Congress. And this is how the Colorado Project or the Condon Report began. It was almost the complete reverse of a scientific research project or in a grant. The suggestion came from the military, not a scientific organization. The chief researcher, Edward Condon, didn't know anything about UFOs. Aside from what he was an expert in was obtaining grants, apparently. None of the chief researchers knew anything in depth about the subject. In fact, those who would have been classified as experts in UFOs or known anything about it were indeed specifically excluded as being potentially biased. Over time, the project fell apart, as Michael Swords writes, he says, one must read the details to believe them. When you do read them, they really are spectacular. And you can read this in Michael Swords' book. James Wadsworth, Wadsworth was a graduate student member of the primary staff. This is his comment on what happened, what he observed being on the Colorado project. And I think, and I'm going to read this as well. So he writes, most of the project heads have duties in their departments and are only part-time on this. Thank God that is the case, as most of them contribute generously with the axe and have little positive to offer, much less enthusiasm. I feel like each general meeting sets the whole project back. You would not believe the chicken shit security notched academic egotism that goes on. It's as though the first concern is to protect themselves from getting tainted by the quasi-scientific animal known as the UAP or UFO. By the time they have succeeded at this, their value as open-minded scientists has suffered greatly. They're too busy maintaining a role to let loose what little creativity they have. So that's pretty damning. Basically, in the end, every prominently involved researcher, other than two, was of the opinion that UFOs were worthy of study, serious study. Those 10 persons went on the record at various times saying so. Nevertheless, Condon wrote oppositely in his conclusions and was quite emotionally opposite his interaction with scientists. Almost everything about the structure of the organization, the choice of personnel, and the behaviors of all involved are classic examples of how not to do science. There was not even a published list of the project staff. So skeptics and scientists who point to, well, the Condon report said there's nothing here. The Condon report was a hot mess. And in fact, the US government has done a very poor job of studying UFOs. This is a quote from Don Berliner on one of his works. While the U.S. Air Force has unquestionably had the capability to investigate UFOs scientifically, there's no evidence that it has ever done so. Published reports and related documents suggest studies were hastily done, each time forced by short-term political considerations and public pressures rather than scientific inquiry. The resulting studies were superficial at best, inept at worst. Again, I'll mention that the 2023 UAP Task Force report was 17 pages long. The 1999 French Committee report was over 90 pages. I think we can do better. Personally, I'm not convinced that much is known about UFOs at all. Our governments may very well not know what to disclose. And at the very least, they ought to be supporting academic scientific study of UFOs. So there's more myths. No evidence that a UFO are a concern for defense. Well, there's the whole business of incursions at nuclear facilities. Excuse me. This is a news article from 1950 from the Oak Ridger. This is from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they have one of the nuclear research installations. But the Atomic Energy Commission wants info on flying saucers seen near atomic energy plants. Flying saucers, if you see a flying saucer, if know anyone who has, the Atomic Energy Commission wants to know about it. Yes, a real article. Robert Hastings has been studying UFO incursions at nuclear open sites for over 50 years, since 1973. It is basically because of this and my hearing about incursions at Malmstrom Air Force Base when I was a graduate student at Montana State University in 1988 that led me to appreciate that this is a real and complicated problem.
Kevin, I have a clarification question by Brenda Densler.
Oh, hello, Brenda.
Brenda asks, so you don't believe there are crashed UFOs that have been retrieved if the government doesn't really know anything about UFOs and thus doesn't know what to say?
I don't know if there are crashed objects that have been retrieved. It's from what I've heard from talking to people, it seems like that's probably the case. How much they actually know is the question, and whether they knowing that you have a craft and that it has some capability doesn't really tell you much about what's going on. It's like somebody gets my car, they don't know anything about me. So what are they going to disclose? That's going to lead to many more questions than it is answers. And I think that's probably the situation we're dealing with. So I hope that clarifies things a bit.
Yeah, she thanks you.
So thank you. So one of the studies that we noted in the paper that I thought was particularly important was the SCU's study, the Scientific Coalition for UAP study, their UAP pattern recognition study. This one written by Ian Porritt, Larry Hancock, and Sean Grosvenor in 2023 points out that UFO incursions at nuclear sites are statistically more frequent when they started out, were statistically more frequent than nearby military bases or population centers. And surprisingly, these incursions typically begin either during the construction of the site or before its full use, before there was radioactive material there, which suggests that we're dealing with some type of intelligent surveillance. This is really worth reading and very interesting. So are UAPs important for national defense? Yes, of course they are. Myth, they're not really anomalous. So here's a picture of Jim Peniston's notebook from the Rendlesham Forest encounter, where he writes, took off unknown, speed impossible, crazily underlined. So I'll talk about this briefly. Going back to our 5 observables, these are speeds and accelerations are some of the observables. I want to point out that this has been known for a long time. And Hermann Oberth, this gentleman in the center, was mentor to Wernher von Braun. This is Wernher von Braun just to his right. Hermann Oberth gave a lecture on flying saucers in 1954. You do the math, this is a long time ago. And he noted in his lecture that their speed is sometimes very high. 19 kilometers per second has been measured with radar. 19 kilometers a second is about 42,000 miles an hour. Mach 55. That is the speed of the New Horizons probe that visited Pluto in 2015. We have known, some people have known since 1954 that UFOs can travel at spacecraft speeds. Why do people always think they're spacecrafts? Because they travel as fast as spacecraft travel. This is simple at this point. And this has been known for a long time. Why does he look so grumpy? No one is still listening to him. It's a problem. There's a number of cases. I won't go through these all in detail. Radar observations at Minot Air Force Base in 1968. This is a paper written by Claude Poer, and he was able to estimate top speeds of 15,000 kilometers per hour, basically 9,000 miles an hour, with an acceleration of about 209 Gs. I worked with Robert Powell and Peter Reale from SCU to study some cases as well. We published a paper on this. This is the Nimitz 2004 case. I think Christian noted before that the radar operators observed them, Kevin Day observed them dropping from 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds. If you work out this acceleration, the acceleration is on the order of 5,000 Gs of acceleration. You can estimate the power if you guess at the mass of the object. We guess these objects were, the Tic Tacs were observed to be about the same size as an F-18. So to get a conservative estimate, we took 1/10 of the mass of the F-18 is the mass of the Tic Tac. And if you do this, you come up with 1.1 terawatts of power. That's more than 10 times the total nuclear power output of the United States. These things are more than anomalous, if that's possible. The JAL 1628 case in Anchorage, Alaska, a very large UFO about the size of an aircraft carrier followed Japanese airline flight 1628 for approximately 45-50 minutes. Dr. Daniel Kumbe had analyzed the radar data from this and published this in his book Anomaly, and noted that looking at 11 jumps that the UFO made from one side of the airplane to another, there were 3 of them in which the acceleration is on the order of 9,000 to 10,000 Gs. The Mach speed goes up to about 350 Gs, which is 269,000 miles an hour. To get an idea of how fast this is, at that speed, the UFO could have reached the moon in 53 minutes. You could have headed off in this UFO to the moon when I started my talk, and you would have been there already. So, and probably be back in time for me to end it, missing the whole thing. These things are really pretty crazy fast. They have exhibit extreme accelerations, extreme speeds. There are no sonic booms. This is the lack of signature that the ATIP program mentions. Plus, there's no energy deposition when decelerating or stopping. When this craft stops, that kinetic energy has to go somewhere. And based on the energy we estimated, that should have been an explosion on the order of a couple hundred Tomahawk cruise missiles. But that did not happen either. So we don't know where the energy goes when they stop. Very anomalous. These consequences of high acceleration mean that at 1,000 Gs, which is what 1/10 of what's been observed, the maximum that's been observed, you can get to 90% the speed of light in 17.5 hours. At a 2,000 G acceleration, you could get to the nearest star in about 3 days. This is because relativity is kicking in and you're getting some time dilation. You can get out to the TRAPPIST planets, where we have planets in the habitable zone. Out 40 light years away, you can make it in 4 days. Now, you can get there faster than it takes me to drive from here to Yellowstone Park in Montana, in Wyoming. Not only are these possibly interstellar craft, they would be excellent interstellar craft. And we noted this in our paper. And when Kirkpatrick at Aero was asked by Senator Gillibrand of New York whether there have been any peer-reviewed scientific publications suggesting that these things could be alien craft or extraterrestrial, he said no, although they were briefed on this paper. So they're not being entirely forthcoming, or at least Kirkpatrick wasn't. I hope the new Aero director does better. Luminosity. This is what Jacques Vallée's paper in that same issue is about. They're extremely luminous, some of which so that many photographs are difficult to interpret. And in fact, this photograph from taken by the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1956 has been studied by Bruce Maccabee and then summarized by Jacques Vallée. That photograph was actually studied under a microscope to figure out how many silver atoms you had, or silver molecules you had being converted to measure the luminosity here. And those calculations done, given the estimated distance between 6 and 20 kilometers to the object, the luminous power is somewhere between 2,500 and 30,000 megawatts. The amount of light being put out by these UFOs is on the order of the amount of power from a nuclear reactor. Why do you need to do this? What is the purpose of emitting hundreds of thousands of megawatts of light? Is this merely a byproduct of the propulsion system? If that's the case, then it's a shocking and telling that they're wasting megawatts of power and considering that to be an acceptable loss. Or are they using the bright light to basically hide inside so you can't observe them? they can be observed, but you can see them, but you can't observe them. That's possible too. So this is the topic of Jacques Vallée's paper, and it's exciting as well. All right, so as a reminder, there's so much to love about this movie, and man, Spielberg got so much of it right, which is really amazing. Now, there's some things we understand better. Now, McCampbell in 1983 wrote a paper where he identified automobile interference types, where you get engine disruption and failure, engine fails to restart in the vicinity of a UFO. And this one, which was, actually, I stopped this too soon. I stopped it before his truck restarted. That was the whole point of showing that video. I messed that up, sorry. The engine self-starts as the UFO departs. And I always thought, well, this is silly. How can the engine restart when it departs? But McCampbell actually has a hypothesis that seems to work. The high electric fields ionize the air, basically shorting out the spark plugs and distributor cap. And that makes it so that the gas engine stops firing. So what you should see is that old gasoline-powered car engines should stop firing or have problems. Diesel engines should not, actually, and that's what is observed. Diesel engines are typically not affected by UFOs. Now, scientists ruining things again. Richard Dreyfuss's character is driving a Ford F-150. That's a diesel engine that should not have been affected by the UFO. That's okay. We can suspend some disbelief for this movie. Mark Roediger's catalog from 1981 has 268 cases which the engine stops, and 27 of them which self-start as the UFO departs. Now, in the movie, when it departs, you hear the engine turn over. You hear the electric motor run to drive the starter to turn the engine over. That's not how they restart. They restart by the piston just firing and starting the engine. And the circuit here basically shows you what's going on. With the ignition switches on, the distributor cap is being shorted out because of the high electric field. The spark plug is as well. But because the distributor is shorted out, you've got a current that's running and puts a magnetic field into the primary of the ignition coil. So when the UFO leaves, the spark plug is no longer shorted out. The air is no longer ionized. The distributor cap is no longer shorted out. So that magnetic field collapses and sends a pulse to the secondary, which sends a pulse to the distributor cap. So if the piston's in the right position with a air-fuel mixture inside the cylinder, it'll fire and start the engine again. And you can calculate how often that should happen. That should happen 10% of the time. And that matches the statistics from Mark Roediger's catalog, where 10% of the 268 cases should have restarted when the UFO left, and that's what's observed. So we think we understand what's going on here, which is exciting. We understand something, thank God, finally. The other thing that's amazing is it shows that what's reported in those 268 cases is realistic. The statistics of 27 of them restarting is what you would expect from this hypothesis. And so that meant that the observers were accurately reporting what they observed. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. There's some evidence that there's high magnetic fields as well. And so these things are truly anomalous. They're also associated with water. Here's some nice books on UFOs and water. Richard Dolan's book is new, coming out this year, which is quite nice. Here is a example of transmedium travel. This is the UAP observed in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, and right now it's underwater, and it'll come out of the water and go back in. And the SCU study shows that it enters the water at about little over 100 miles an hour. It slows down a little bit. It doesn't really go below 80 miles an hour. And then actually at points underwater, it speeds up. You don't have splashing going on. You don't have a large wave on the surface because of the object. You can barely notice it's there. So it's barely interacting with the water. Skeptics have claimed that this is a Chinese lantern. I don't know how many Chinese lanterns can race through the water underwater at 100 miles an hour. Ooh, even less if those numbers are wrong. There's an encounter from 1987. The New Zealand frigate, the Southland, encountered a large underwater UFO, USO, which they found from sonar to be 150 feet wide. It basically followed at a distance of 2.5 kilometers and closed that distance in about 3 seconds, which gives you a minimum speed of about 1,800 miles an hour. If you assume that it was actually sped up and accelerated, you would get an acceleration of 57 Gs with a top speed of 37,000 miles an hour. So again, these things are underwater and anomalous. And transmedium travel of UFOs have been observed and recorded for over 140 years. These are just some of the examples. You'll find more cases in Richard Dolan's book, which is really worth reading and paying attention to. This is the most ignored aspect of UFOs, or UAP. It's been consistently reported for more than 150 years. These things are not all possibly Chinese or Russian. Will you please stop with that suggestion? Yes, some of them today could be, but the extraterrestrial or non-human hypothesis really needs to take some center stage here. They're also not all alien spacecraft, which is interesting. In Richard Dolan's book, he talks about an event witnessed by Mary Kingsley, who was an explorer in Central Africa in the late 1800s. She was a biologist, identified a number of interesting fish that were unknown to Western science. She went out late at night and observed this. She said, down through the forest on the lake bank opposite came a violet ball the size of a small orange. When it reached the sand beach, it hovered along it to and fro close to the ground. In a few minutes, another ball of similarly colored light came towards it from behind one of the islets or islets, and the two wavered to and fro over the beach, sometimes circling each other. I made off toward them in the canoe, thinking, as I still do, they were some brand new kind of luminous insect. When I got onto their beach, one of them went off into the bushes and the other away over the water. I followed it in the canoe, for the water here is very deep, and when I almost thought I had got it, it went down into the water, and I could see it glowing as it sunk until it vanished in the depths. So these things UAP are a class of phenomena. They're not all interesting alien spacecraft or something. They could very well be something else. And I note in our paper that that there was a sighting by security guards at a nuclear site in the 1950s, I believe, which they also saw a violet light, came and danced around their feet, and then went up into the trees. And so I make note that these two might be similar. So UFOs have an affinity for water, and maybe we should be paying attention to the other ocean worlds in our solar system. Oh, so many myths to dispel. This is why it's a long paper. It's really long. Why is there never any physical evidence? Well, there is. There's tons of physical evidence. UFOs have collided with cars. I did not know that until I started looking into this. They've landed, causing damage and leaving physical traces. They've dumped molten metal. They've also emitted this material called angel hair. Now, we talk about these things. We avoid the topic of crashes. It's just too controversial. And there's plenty to get excited about without talking about that. So here's two cases where they've collided with cars. Deputy Val Johnson's 1979 collision with a UAP in Minnesota. Here's a photograph of his police car. It flew at his car and actually went through the windshield and came into the car with him, as he tells it. The windshield smashed. There's other damage to the car. That car exists in a museum in Minnesota right now. You can actually go visit his car that was hit by a UAP. Another case that was studied by Phyllis Budinger, chemist, a 1998 UFO collision with a family's car in Mount Clemens, Michigan. This ball of light the size of a basketball actually hit the roof of their car and left this trace here, which turns out to be magnesium. So these things aren't simple at all.
Kevin,
Yes.
can I quickly could I quickly ask that we somewhat come to close, because I see that people are leaving. Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, sorry, yes.
I don't want to cut you off because I could go on forever, but
Yes, I know. I didn't know exactly how to play this because we had allotted 3 hours. So I put this together. I thought, well, that's really a lot, but I wanted to make sure I had enough. So
you had enough.
I will
I'm sure
speed a good bit. I will speed up a good bit. Yes.
it would be great so people can literally ask questions. Thanks
Yes,
a lot
no,
for
we will do this. Yeah, so they've had collisions with cars. There's the Delphus, Kansas farm landing, which left debris, chemical evidence on the ground, which has been studied by both Farouk and Budinger. Phyllis Budinger found that it contained oxalic acid, which is interesting. She's also studied angel hair, which is fascinating. In this case, I found this to be amazing with metallic barbell-shaped objects about almost a meter in length, spinning around and spewing out this angel hair, which was collected, and she found it to be an organic polymer containing protein amide-type linkages, most similar to caterpillar silk. Why are metallic UAPs putting out caterpillar silk? What's going on here? This is not simple at all. It's remarkable, though. Now we're at the stage where we currently have multiple academic scientific teams studying UAP. And these are the academic teams which are associated with universities or colleges. Erling Strand here is working with Project Hestelin in Norway, which has been in operation since 1984, which is excellent. And then we have Hakan Kayal has worked with IFIX in Germany. We've got Eamon Ansbro working with SETI Kingsland Low Key in Ireland. We've got the Albany UAPX collaboration here in Albany, New York. The Galileo project with Avi Loeb and Wes Waters and Laura Domine and others in Harvard in Massachusetts. And then we have Beatrix Villaroyal's team in Stockholm studying it with the VASCO project, looking for astronomical sources that appear and vanish on photographic plates. We also have private and citizen science research efforts. The Hudson Valley Pine Bush studies went from 1980 to 2003. You've got the Eye on the Sky Tedesco brothers are studying UAP off Long Island, not far from the JFK airport, actually. And we've got pilots from JFK who are seeing UAPs, so this is interesting. The UAP Tracker Project, the UFO Data Acquisition Project, UFODAP, Sky 360. We've got multiple organizations at this point. The American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics is working to study UAP at this point with Graves. The National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, NARCAP, which was related with Dick Haynes and others, have been still in operation. SCU and the Sentinel Center, which Baptiste Friscourt is working with, and the French 3AF Sigma 2. We've got SUAPs, all of us here, and the Soul Foundation and UAP Check, which Michael Valiant and Eduardo Russo have been working with. So we've got groups around the world who are now working to study UAP scientifically, which is really an excellent development. The strategy is not different than what was advised at the meeting that Sturrock held in Tarrytown, New York. We need to reduce the probability of error. So you need multiple independent, disparate pieces of evidence. Model this after multi-messenger astronomy, where you have multiple instruments, multiple imaging modalities, multiple observation points, and multiple independent observing groups in some cases. We divide and conquer the extraordinary hypothesis by establishing less controversial aspects of the hypothesis. One reason why we avoided crashes in our paper. And we need to remain agnostic with respect to the hypothesis. We keep all of these hypotheses on the table. We're focusing on characteristics, phenomenology, that then have implications for the hypothesis various hypotheses we're considering. And I think I'm almost at the conclusion here. We'll conclude with a note from James McDonald. The scientific world at large is in for a shock when it becomes aware of the astonishing nature of the UFO phenomenon and its bewildering complexity. This is 1968. I make it that terse comment well aware that it invites easy ridicule, but intellectual honesty demands that I make clear that my 2 years study convinces me that in the UFO problem lie scientific and technological questions that will challenge the ability of the world's outstanding scientists to explain as soon as they start examining the facts. The scientific community has been casually ignoring as nonsense as a matter of extraordinary scientific importance. So I'm hoping that we can finally realize James McDonald's vision. We've dispelled a number of myths, hopefully in this paper, and hopefully this will do more work to convince serious scientists that this is worthy of study. And you can download a copy of my paper, our paper here. Many of us are hopefully still in the audience. Many of the co-authors are hopefully in the audience right now as well. And I have some additional references, and thank you very much for your kind attention. If you have not gotten enough of me, which I sincerely doubt at this point, you can watch me on these various shows as well, or like a million podcasts.
Fabulous. Kevin, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I'm overwhelmed, but in the most positive sense. And let me just say that I really think that you instantly did an anomaly yourself here, because you kept 40 people on your lips, on your lips for 2 hours. That's something I've never ever managed at university. I will be silent and learn. Thanks a lot. That was great. That's
well, thank you. Yes, thank you all for your kind attention. I really appreciate it. Yes, this is. I was of course nervous giving this talk, and I thought 3 hours is very long. I have to have enough stuff to cover, and that's hard to balance. But it's but then of course it's, I warn people, don't get me started on this topic because I won't stop. I mean, it's like the paper. The paper grew into 200 pages. There's a lot here. It's really pretty amazing. And in fact, we had our neighbors down the road here had a barbecue, 2 years ago. And none of my friends want to know about UAP, which I think is really kind of interesting. They all know I study it, but none of them have any questions or seem to be curious either, which I find to be a little odd. But at this barbecue, one of our neighbor's friends was really interested. And she said, okay, she cornered me and tell me everything. You have to tell me everything. Don't hold anything back. Just tell me. And so I started talking about it. And after I don't know, an hour plus probably, it probably was like this, she was terrified. She made me stop and she goes, I'm not going to sleep for the rest of my life. I'm terrible. And she was angry with me. She goes, how can you tell me all these things? I wasn't prepared for any of this. I said, but you wanted to know everything. And she goes, you can't just dump this on. I was talking about abductions and all the interesting stuff about them, right? And she was mortified, and she still does not. I've seen her since, and she doesn't want to have anything to do with me.
The good thing about
I hope I didn't do that to anyone here.
I'm sure this audience is insatiable. I don't know if that's the English word for it, but they keep on taking it in. So in order to have a question and answers procedure here, I wanted to draw your attention to your lower right corner of your screen. There are different symbols. One is a lock, and there is a chat symbol, and between of the both there is this. It's dots. It's 9 dots. So if you click on that, you can access the a tool that says question and answers, Fragen und Antworten auf Deutsch. If you can answer, if you put in your questions there, they're neatly ordered. I would start with the earliest question that I was aware of, and then I have to go back into the chat, and that was at 2052. And that's our esteemed colleague. Wait. Here. Rafael Di Carl Antonio. He asks, how can we expect to effectively educate society if we strip science communication of its sense and curiosity and play, while simultaneously neglecting to fully engage with the most powerful tool ever created for spreading information, social media, yet take pride in doing it?
I'm not exactly sure what's being asked, but there's a difference between educating people via social media and just dumping videos on social media. I'm assuming that might be what's related. So scientists don't take raw data and give it to anybody. I mean, raw data's, I mean, in the terms of videos is one thing. Most of the videos we record are horribly boring. And yes, we can cut out the interesting pieces and put them online, but and you can do that, but it should be done after the videos have been fully studied and fully vetted and understood. I think that's the point. You don't want to have a quote scientific team that last week got a video and just put it online. We have videos of UAPs that we've recorded, and we've not identified them, and we've not released them. That's not yet. I mean, they will when we've studied it.
Yeah. I understand. Michael, should I ask out your question? Read it out. I can do that. So Mike asks, Kevin, can the 26 sigma spike be looked at equally plausible as evidence to the contrary? Since the spike at such a high peak drops off fairly rapidly, never really to repeat, maybe that's not true, that would seem a priori to argue more for noise, not signal. How do we really evaluate the 26 sigma result?
What's the difference between noise and signal? That's what it comes down to, right?
Well,
it's all signal. It's all signal, depending what you want to look at. So that spike is some kind of signal, and whether it is how do you explain it is the 21 sigma. You are going to have to come up with a new explanation. There's some kind of phenomena there that caused that to happen. What is it? Is it a social phenomenon? Possible. It's very possible. Is it did we get a huge arrival of craft from Alpha Centauri? Did we, you can start making up hypotheses, and these are all just made up, but we don't know what the situation was. And so, but that's where study would have to come in. Can you come up with a hypothesis that could explain that, explain something like that? Noise is usually relegated to phenomena that you don't understand. That is usually not, you typically deem it to not be important enough to really study or understand, or it's usually things that and so noise is a very messy issue when you're dealing with noise in science. I often throw out outliers. Well, what caused the outlier? Well, that's maybe something interesting of study. And so it's very difficult to throw out outliers, and it can become very contentious as well.
All right. And then there is Ines Ordaneta. She asks, thank you, Dr. Knuth, for such a detailed presentation. And asking you as, well, that's my connotation, as the super scientist in the room, if you could comment on Beatrice's latest paper on the image profiles of transients in the Paloma Sky Survey, about the 100K luminous objects found on the plate disks recorded from the telescopes in the 50s. That's
interesting. And I found her work to be fascinating, and I'm excited by it. And some of what was published early I found to be very compelling. I don't know, I haven't had the time to read through this particular paper, so I don't want to comment in detail. But if there's a claim of 100,000 luminous objects that are unexplained, that's a little worrisome. You know, I don't know what to make of that. I would be maybe more skeptical that it's that you've got some kind of noise that you've not accommodated. You've got another phenomenon. You know, I don't want to say dust on plates, because I don't think it's that, because she's looked at that. I trust her that she's looked at that. I don't think it's as simple as radioactive material falling out from a nearby atomic explosion. Well, there wouldn't be a nearby explosion. So, but I don't think, but I've heard people throw those answers out. And I think that's the problem. Those are hypotheses that are just kind of thrown out. So, so I think it's difficult. And somebody notes she hasn't actually looked at the plates. I don't know what she's actually looked at. I don't know the details. I've not worked with her on that. So these are things to now look at more closely and maybe be a little more careful.
All right. Yeah, I remember that I asked her.
Part of the checking and double checking process has to happen, and
yeah,
this is the not fun part of science where somebody comes in and ruins everything, right?
Well, here's the social scientist saying, you know, maybe there has been a space program before the Sputnik time. You know, you never know. But that's just a funny note on the side. I think I don't have other questions. Mike, you have to help me out if I'm overseeing something. I have a bunch of questions. Stephen Hall is asking something. Stephen, I think I can't access your question. If you have it ready, you can also speak it quickly out. I don't know where to look for it. I can't find it.
Yeah.
Where the Q&A mode actually is about writing rather than talking, but go ahead for it. No, don't worry.
Hello, Stephen.
Hey, I loved your talk. It was wonderful. I could go another 3 hours, frankly. It was really good. However, my question may deflate your ego just a little bit, and that is, I've had a couple of wonderful courses with Dr. Kimberly Ingalls on phenomenology.
Right.
Seems to me that is a new and growing source of information. It's just hard. It's not something you can study empirically. It's something you have to study, obviously, by interviews. So please comment on what you would say about phenomenology as a study of what's going on here.
Oh, thank you. No, I know Kimberly, and I appreciate her work. I mean, I think this is another source of information, right? You've got people who have who have claimed to encounter beings sometimes associated with what we identify as UFOs. So now let me put it this way. It would be silly for us not to talk to these people and not to find out what they know. Because if it's true that even a handful of them have actually come into contact with these craft close up, or beings associated with these craft close up, they may have very valuable knowledge that you can't get any other way. So ignoring it, calling it ridiculous and nonsense is foolish, I think. So I think it's important to look and see what people have to say, listen to them. In in most cases, I'm sure something happened to them, and that something's important to them, and our experiences are what's most important to us. So I think as humans, paying attention to those experiences are important.
Thank you very much.
I can totally second that, Stephen. As a social scientist, I really think that this is a resource that we haven't worked properly with, and I think you could, apart from the phenomenological question, which goes much deeper in what people have seen and experienced and what happens to their states of minds. I also think that we're entering an age where, with the help of AI evaluation, you could start, combining observations and reports much deeper than what has been done.
Yeah, one thing I might add is my slide on cars stopping and restarting, where you look at Mark Roediger's catalog of vehicles that have been affected by UFOs. The fact that 10% of those cars were observed to restart tells us that those 2,000 people all reported things properly and accurately. It all agrees with our hypothesis, which is a reasonable hypothesis at this point. So those eyewitness accounts were, at least those aspects of those eyewitness accounts were correct. So listening to them, we learned something. And I think the same follows for other more exotic accounts as well.
Yeah. Ines, you have a question.
Hello, Ines.
Or a comment.
Hi again. Thank you for accepting a second question. I saw your presentation about language where you talk about a book, The Little Prince, and there's this linear regression, which is just incredible. And so that made me think about the movie The Arrival, where you have a physicist and a linguist, and it's the linguist who finally bridges the gap and is able to communicate with this species. I just think that it was very important, and I wanted to see if what do you think about this in relationship to UAP phenomena? And I think like consciousness would be totally implicated in this. I think that there's this realm between 0-point energy, consciousness, and UAP phenomena that is completely like entangled. And what would you think about that?
Those are great questions. It's a great question and also a great movie. I love that movie. It's a fantastic movie. And look, as much as we don't like it, I'm a physicist, so I have to, and I always worry when I'm talking about these things because I have to be a bit careful, right? But the fact is, and this is a fact, that people who claim to be encountering these objects close up report all sorts of weird, crazy, I shouldn't use the word crazy, very unusual, exotic phenomena, which we would normally call paranormal phenomena, right? We just kind of throw that into it. It's another class of things that we don't know anything about, right? And that gets reported all the time from people who claim to be close to what appear to be the same UFOs that we observe from the ground, right? So it's hard to know what to make of this. The complexity of this problem is really enormous. I think that there've been I've seen people be a little cautious with data and not wanting to share sometimes and I don't want to share this data because I might get a Nobel Prize or make a big discovery. And like, there are plenty of discoveries here to go around. I think this is probably the biggest, the most important thing we could possibly be studying at this point. And I suspect that what we're going to find is that what we tend to call paranormal are just physical phenomena that are typically rare in nature, that we don't understand yet because we haven't studied them. So it's almost as if, if you have an intelligent species, intelligent people who have understood these phenomena, they might very well use them for technology. And so a lot of the UFO technology could be based on phenomena that right now we call paranormal. But they're really just physical effects we don't know anything about. So it could be when you you approach a UFO, you've got they're taking advantage of making an advantage of these paranormal effects for their technology that then we see as just being really bizarre, right? And can't make heads or tails of it just because we don't understand what's going on. I mean, it's kind of like if a person from the Roman times, they would know about static electricity and they would know about magnetism from lodestones. But that's all that they know about electromagnetism. But we use that as technology. That's how I'm talking to you right now, through electromagnetism. But the Romans didn't know. They wouldn't know how to use that for talking to each other. And so for them, it would be totally bizarre. So you give Roman a cell phone and, they put their tongue in the hole where you charge it and they get a little electric shock and they go like, oh my God, this is like electricity. Somehow.
Magic. Yeah.
I think it could very well that's what's going on, but the complexity is not to be understated here, I think.
Yes, and I do agree with you that it's like physics that we did not understand. It's probably, So thank you very much for your answer.
I wish Arthur Clarke had known of the return of his second law. It's pretty much it. Mark Cruzum has a question. Do you think it would be helpful to use integral theory as a framework for putting the evidence you've presented into broader context?
I'm not sure what he means by integral theory. I'm guessing he doesn't mean calculus.
Mark, can you help us?
Sure. Sorry about that.
Right.
I guess I was assuming I had it I studied that in a course earlier this year, and they put things like physical evidence in one category. They put things like experience or testimony in what you might call the subjective category, that suddenly, one experiencer's account may not be very persuasive, but when you add hundreds of them and they're seeing the same thing, kind of like what you were showing there. And then you have the broader context of things through history. So physical evidence through history, through archaeology, and then looking at cultural histories. I don't like to use the word mythology, but cultural histories, where you actually mention, things going all the way back. So you almost put together a tapestry of how physical evidence is one thing, but when you add it to these other three areas, and I think integral theory has, depending on who you talk to, who's a person in that area, has many more areas, but it suddenly adds more? Or do you think that adding those extra things muddies it up and you're like, nope, just stick to the physical evidence, that's it, I don't want to talk about anything else?
Thanks, Mark.
Oh, good points, good question, and hello, Mark. Thank you. Excuse me. There are times when only some subset of data is helpful to test certain hypotheses. But those are typically limited hypotheses. So to make limited inferences, you might rely on only one type of data. But if you really want to understand the whole phenomenon, you really have to take into account all of the information you can get. And that's where a lot of skeptics kind of fall apart when they they talk about the Nimitz case is a great example. Well, those are fuzzy pictures. You don't know what they're pictures of. You don't know anything. Well, you do know things. You know that the radar operator, you don't even know that the radar is working. Well, you know that the radar operator gave the pilot the coordinates and they went there and saw the object. You know that. Those are all additional pieces of information. And I think that, there are certainly times when the more information you have, even disparate information of different modes or different types, is extremely helpful. And yeah, it may in some cases muddy the water or make it more difficult for some hypotheses, but in understanding the bigger picture, it's going to be vital, I think.
All right, thank you. I think we've come to a close with a question. Well, I take the opportunity to ask one myself. I have 5, but I restrict myself to
I haven't held back. You don't need to either.
I have the question. The one thing that struck me is when you said that that it's the question that UAPs and national security or defense are in some sort of a precarious relationship, and you recommend not to look too closely at this implication. Why would you say that?
I say that because I don't want people to focus too much on defense and threat. I think that's part of the. This is a human problem. We're so fearful of being hurt or attacked or anything like this that we, this is why we have the worst weapons in the world and do horrible things to each other, right? Because we're afraid of being hurt ourselves. We're crazy and this way, and I don't want people to focus on that aspect of it. It's easy to latch on to that aspect and say this is why governments need to be paying attention, because we do that all the time. But that really isn't why scientists should be studying these things. And I don't. So while I can present that as evidence that this is important and interesting, I don't want it to go too far and say, look, there's a threat here and we need to go protect ourselves. And the problem is we've been shooting at these things for 50 years already we're shooting at things that we don't know what they are. This is beyond foolish, right? And beyond stupid. You have no idea what you're dealing with. If these are extraterrestrial spaceships coming from another planet with thousands of years ahead of us, this is really dumb. Beyond dumb, because anytime somebody shoots at a UFO, that's an act of war according to our beliefs, right? Or the way we operate. So we've basically been trying to war with these guys. I don't know what could be more stupid, but let me just say that much and stop there.
And if I could just because my question comes from that I'm a little irritated about the current discussion about the intrusion of the new object to our solar system, the Avilö, and it gets this, there is a buildup of a momentum saying that we should be concerned about our security here. I don't know if it resonates with the three-body problem too much, and that's a cultural substrate, but I'm a little helpless in the change of the narratives over time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that, two things to say about that. First, if we're really concerned about security, we should stop screaming into the universe with radio waves. The first thing you do, shut down all the radio transmissions, all of it, because anyone within a 100 light year radius knows anyone with a radio transmitter knows we're here. And maybe this is why SETI hasn't found anything. Maybe the other civilizations are smart enough that we don't want to let everybody know we're here. We went into this with the belief that we're the only ones in the universe, which is also kind of stupid. We've made a lot of big mistakes in our thinking, and we continue to do that, and I think it's silly. So we should stop screaming into the universe, maybe. And the second thing with the Atlas object coming into our solar system is fantastic and amazing, and it's an opportunity to study an interstellar object which we've never done, and we don't know everything that's out there yet. So the fact that it doesn't behave like a comet maybe isn't too surprising. It might not be a comet. It could be something else. It doesn't necessarily have to be an alien spacecraft. And I've heard people come out and say that we shouldn't take Juno, who's slated to crash into Jupiter's atmosphere and collect data on Jupiter's atmosphere. We shouldn't send Juno out to see this object because we shouldn't do that because Avi Loeb thinks it's an alien spacecraft. Avi Loeb is just keeping that on the table as a hypothesis. And we should send Juno out there because even if it isn't an alien spacecraft, whatever it is, we should go and investigate it. And in an ideal world, we would have probes set up in orbit around the solar system so that anything coming through would fly by something and we would be able to measure it. That's what we should have. That's what NASA should have been doing for the last 40 years, is putting probes up everywhere in the solar system. No, that costs too much money. We have wars to fight, so we can't do that. We're nuts. It's a problem.
It's a funny thing to consider that in 3 billion years, Voyager will cause the same issue in some faraway solar system.
It will. And the thing is that we can't, in 80,000 years, it's going to go through another solar system. But some reason we can't get our heads around that that's a possibility for us.
It's really weird.
We're kind of nuts that way. It's a little strange. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're already doing what we're saying is impossible.
It's exactly that. All right. So I think we've come to an end of an wonderful evening. I feel totally privileged to have been with you all, and especially with you, Kevin. I thank you so much in the name of the society and
Thank you so much for having me.
the whole audience for cheering us up, for keeping us entertained, and people love it. I mean, there's still more than half of the people that started, way more than half, is still in the chat.
That to me is also remarkable. Thank you so much.
It's an anomaly, I tell you. All right, so thanks, Mike, for setting this up. Thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure. Come by on the websites of our wonderful society and make us bigger and greater. And thank you, Kevin, for everything.
Thank you, Kevin, very much.
Thanks,
you. Everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.